Welcome back to another new episode of the Zag Talk podcast. It's been a while since we've been here talking to you guys, but it's Carson Hollyoak. I'm here with Dylan and Brian. Say hi to everybody.
Hello, all.
And we're back.
We are back, baby. We are fucking back. We are back. Yeah. Classic. We are back. We are back.
Oh, boy. Love it. Love it.
Back and better than ever.
Yeah, we're excited to be back talking about Gonzaga basketball again. We've had quite the hiatus here as we've had pretty busy late springs and summers. We've had a couple weddings and an engagement and a lot of other stuff in between. So how have you guys been doing?
Been doing good. It was a blast celebrating Carson's wedding a couple weekends ago. Got to see Brian marry Carson and his now wife. So that was a blast.
Yeah, it's been a hectic summer, but it's been really good. Beyond the weddings, we ended up getting a new puppy as well. So been dealing with puppy stuff, the peeing in the house, the biting, so we're almost through those phases. I think we're kind of, rounding the curve here, which is good.
Now between the two Hollyoak families and the Mary family, we have almost a starting lineup of former Gonzaga players and current. We got Tilly, Perry, Remy Barkamus, and Nigel. So somebody needs to get another dog. It's not going to be Natalie and I, but
I will pass on the dog for now as we're still in the apartment. But I think as soon as we hopefully next year after the wedding's in May, after the wedding, we're going to start looking for places. So fingers crossed. And I might just have to convince Elizabeth to do a Gonzaga player name. We'll see.
There you go. You complete the lineup.
Exactly. It's going to be Shem for sure.
Just get the biggest dog you can. Like an Irish Wolfhound or a Mastiff or something.
Do you want to share your recent interaction? Speaking of Perry, would you like to share your recent interaction on Twitter as well?
Oh boy. Yeah, absolutely. Been going back and forth with my idol, Caden Perry's mom. It's been a fun, a fun little interaction. I think there was some confusion around my identity, but it's been cleared up. The fact of the matter is I'm just a big Caden Perry stan, as evidenced by naming our most recent puppy Perry. So yeah, fun interaction, all in good fun. I think that's one thing I really love about Zag Twitter is being able to have just really wholesome interactions like that. So good times.
I think you decided to leave out the part about naming a dog after her son though, right?
Right. She doesn't know that, but Miss Perry, if you're listening right now, now you know.
All right, well, let's get into some more serious Gonzaga basketball topics. We kind of jumping in at a really busy time with some unexpected news for the good and the bad. So we're going to cover some of the Mark Few drama that's come out this week. We got some BYU potential conference realignment, Kevin Pangos news that just came out today, and then we'll jump into a new series of segments that we're going to do talking about kind of the biggest questions for all the Gonzaga guys this year who will probably see, or at least have a chance of seeing, some regular playing time. So we'll all get to that. Let's start with Mark Few.
On Monday night, Labor Day, Mark Few was pulled over and cited for a DUI offense. He was apparently driving erratically and speeding just north of Coeur d'Alene. And he apparently was taken into the station, or he chose to be taken into the station as opposed to do a breathalyzer right then and there. And it turned out that he had a blood alcohol level of 0.119 or 0.12, somewhere in that small range. But yeah, obviously it's no laughing matter. I mean, super serious offense. And I really hope that, this doesn't impact the program. He's already put out some statements, but anything I'm missing there, guys?
No, I think that that kind of covers it. It is what it is at this point. It sucks to see somebody like that, and that's so well respected. And I think that most people, everybody regards as someone as having really high character and normally isn't making the decisions like that. And it happened. It sucks, and hopefully he can make amends for it and take the right steps. Hopefully it's not a deeper issue, and happy that nobody got hurt there. But I think, he's the kind of guy who's going to deal with it head on, and hopefully we'll get through it. And the biggest thing for me is I hope it just doesn't affect the team and take attention away from the team during the season, which I'm sure it will. I mean, it's going to be in the student sections of opposing teams, but hopefully in terms of the media coverage and everything where it should be focused on these kids playing as the number one team in the country and a really good team, that it's not kind of the thing that it keeps going back to. So we'll see. And then hopefully the other thing that I texted you guys after it happened was I hope it doesn't affect the recruiting visit. We've heard that Jaden Bradley is supposed to be on campus this weekend. And I don't know. I don't know how that goes with all this going on, if Mark's going to stay out of it or if he's going to be there, and if that ends up leading to him maybe not coming here. Who knows? I mean, there's a million reasons why a guy might not come to a certain school. So that's just my hope that it doesn't overshadow what we're there to watch,
Yeah, I think if Jaden comes into town this weekend, I'd hazard to guess Mark will probably steer clear of that visit, just knowing we're still in the beginnings of this, probably, as much as we wouldn't like it to be called a saga. I think it'll definitely be a news story over the coming weeks as we get more information in terms of how Gonzaga is going to handle it and how the team's going to handle it. So, ultimately, I'm hoping it's a slap on the wrist in terms of overall impact to the team. This is uncharacteristic of Mark Few. We saw a little bit of a similar situation with Josh Perkins a couple years ago. He got suspended for, I think, 2 games at the time. Obviously, it's a coach, a little bit higher standards to be held to. We haven't gotten our full schedule yet, so we're not going to really know exactly what games Mark Few may or may not miss if he misses games at the beginning of the season. Do you guys think we're going to see a multi-game suspension for Few to start out the season?
Josh Perkins got 2 for a DUI light, I guess is what you would call it. He probably drove the car, didn't get caught driving the car. He fell asleep in the car with it running away from where I think he was supposed to be coming from. So he got 2 games for that. Like you said, it's a coach, not a player, probably a higher standard. College kids make mistakes. Coaches probably have less of a leash. I think he's going to be 5 games would be my guess. And I think we were talking about the Texas game and, maybe they try to throw some games in before then so that he's back for that. And I honestly think if you have him miss a couple really crappy games that don't matter and then send him back for the first big game, you're probably going to get a bigger blowback from fans in the community. So I think that, somebody had said it was the biggest game ever at Gonzaga, which I disagree with, but it's a huge game. It's a top 5 matchup, probably in terms of rankings. It's the biggest game. So I think you make him sit that one out. That one is, he's going to feel it. It's going to seem like it's a significant thing. And then hopefully we move on from that. And it can be the story they talk about when we win a national championship and overcoming all this adversity and this drama that didn't need to be there.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think that, and this was actually pointed out on Twitter, I think it was Tristan Freeman who tweeted this out, but there's not really anyone in the Zag community that's rushing to his defense and trying to sweep this under the rug. I think everyone's kind of just like, look, what he did was super wrong. He deserves to be punished. If not equal to what Josh Perkins was punished, like more. I think the consensus is that he should get at least 3 games, and definitely be punished more than Josh Perkins. I think that you're right, totally right, Carson. It would be viewed as kind of sweeping it under the rug if we were to try and fit in a whole bunch of exhibition games before the Texas game. In all honesty, though, the sign of a good coach, or what makes a good coach, and I believe Mark Few is a really good coach, is the preparation for big games like that. And so I would have trust in his coaching staff, B. Mike, Roger Powell, and Stephen Gentry to handle in-game situations like that. I think in the past, Mark Few has really leaned on his assistants for in-game adjustments and things like that too. So I would not imagine Mark Few missing the Texas game impacting the outcome. Let's just put it that way. I think that it might be a huge deal on paper. In this scenario, it's not going to be that big of a deal for the team. They'll be able to push through that adversity.
And honestly, I think, missing one of your first real games of the season against a team like Texas, it's also one of Texas's first real games of the season. It'll be a test of how well the team has meshed so far. I think, this happens mid-season and teams are both in the thick of, being cohesive. B. Mary, you mentioned this the other day. It's going to be an early season game for both teams, and I think it'll keep us somewhat on level footing, not having Few there if that ends up being the scenario, rather than, being in the thick of it and being really aligned and then losing your head coach, and Texas already also being kind of solid as a team. So I do think all things being said, at the end of the day, if he misses the Texas game, I think you're right. I think it keeps it pretty even in terms of outcome.
Would either of you be shocked if they decided to suspend him for the whole entire non-conference slate?
Yes, I would be shocked.
Yeah, I think I would be pretty surprised. I saw somebody mention, I can't remember where, but that it would be a handful of games either at the beginning of the year or at the beginning of the conference schedule. And I guess I understand conference matters more in a way, I guess. But at the same time, for someone like Gonzaga, I think the non-conference really matters more at this point. I mean, obviously you have to seed well and you have to win your tournament, but you could lose 10 games in conference and still win the tournament and be there. So, and I think it would be a weird look to not punish him immediately, to have him coach and then leave. That doesn't really seem to make sense, but we'll see.
Yeah, and I think what you said about I do think they're going to still schedule an exhibition game before Texas. I think you can come out and say, this was already in conversation. We're not doing this to cut down on the amount of big games Few's going to miss. As of right now, if we suspended him for 3 games, he'd be missing Texas, Central Michigan, and then UCLA. So tough.
I think there's
Dixie State. Yeah. My apologies. Yep. Dixie State, Texas, and then Central Michigan would be 3. If his first game back at that point is after 3 games, he'd be UCLA. I would hazard to guess, whatever way we set it up, I think Few will be coaching against Duke in Las Vegas on the 26th of November. If I was a betting man, he'll be on the court for that game.
Yeah, I think it's hard for me to think of a situation where he's not coaching for the Duke game, because let's see, we got Dixie State, Texas, Alcorn State, Bellarmine, Central Michigan, UCLA, Duke. Those are our first 7 games.
Yep.
But they couldn't make a statement and do that. But we'll see. Well, let's move on to some happier, some lighter tone stuff. Brian, you want to take this one?
Sure, yeah, I'll take it. Some big exciting news. Kevin Pangos is joining the Cleveland Cavaliers. He was just signed on a 2-year deal totaling $3.5 million. 1.67 of that is guaranteed in year 1, which is super exciting. I think that he deserves this. And what he was waiting for was that guaranteed money, because I think there are so many players that are really, really good internationally. They get that 2-way contract or that contract, but nothing's guaranteed. Turns out they're not needed, or a trade happens, and then all of a sudden they miss out on guaranteed money that they would have made overseas. So the fact that he's getting guaranteed money from the Cavs is huge. Really, really exciting stuff. Yeah. Dylan, do you want to take us through some of the other stuff that's going on around some Zags in the NBA and over in Europe?
Yeah, absolutely. So draft happened. Saw a couple of Zags get picked. Jalen Suggs goes to Orlando, sliding down to number 4. We will feel out how Toronto feels at the end of the season. Suggs absolutely went off in Summer League. He's looking quite solid. He's going to be probably the point guard of the future for Orlando. It'll be interesting. I think it'll be a really good fit for him. We'll see how he does, but I think Toronto's going to be kicking themselves at the end of the season. Kispert goes to the Wizards in the first round as well. I think that's a great matchup. Teams up with Rui Hachimura in Washington. Going to be a tough season for the Wizards, but hopefully a really big developmental season for Kispert. Only other Zag from this past year's team is Ayayi. Also made it is still currently on the Lakers on a 2-way contract. So we'll see where that goes. Probably be playing a bunch of G League, but going to be a big developmental season for him as well. Petrusev did make it onto the 76ers roster and eventually ended up leaving that team and is back in Europe on a team in Turkey. So that rounds out the last couple of recent Zags. Other cool signing news over the offseason. Nigel is headed to Real Madrid, not the soccer team, but the basketball team, but got a huge bunch of guaranteed money and had a kid over the summer as well. So congrats to Nigel.
Married, I think.
Yeah. Marriage at the beginning of the summer and then a kid and then guaranteed money from Real Madrid. So really big offseason for Nigel. Super happy for him. Wilcher's moving around in Spain as well. He's on a Gran Canaria team, and Josh Perkins is over in Italy. I know we're missing a bunch of guys. I know there's some other NBA Zags as well. I think there's a Twitter account, Zags in the NBA. Follow them. They keep up to date on every Zag in the NBA and their stat lines. And that's kind of it for a recent Zag movement.
All right, so moving into our next topic for this episode, kind of came out last week, I think it was, maybe 2 weeks ago, that BYU was going to get an invite from the Big 12 to join the conference along with Houston, Cincinnati, and UCF. There had been some speculation on whether or not BYU would just be sending their football team since they're an independent, or if they'd be sending all their sports, leaving the WCC completely. And it looks like that's going to be the case. It sounds like as soon as 2023, which is actually 2 years or 1 year before Texas and Oklahoma are supposed to leave to go to the SEC. So the Big 12 will go from 10 teams to 14 teams and then back down to 12, assuming nobody else leaves. But we've also heard some rumors about Kansas to the Big 10 and a couple other SEC potential teams in the conference. So who knows what that's going to look like. We had talked about this whole kind of Gonzaga conference conversation in a prior episode when we had an interview with Tyler Seth. You guys can kind of go back and listen to the general thoughts there, but the takeaway from it was don't fix it if it's not broke. Besides the dream scenario of Gonzaga as a independent playing a conference or non-conference slate of the top 25 teams in the country. So while that would be really sweet, that's not going to happen ever. And so now the question is, do you think that the WCC is broken for Gonzaga basketball with BYU no longer being in the conference?
I mean, it's tough. I think the one way to look at it is yes, it's broken. They've been our biggest competition in terms of most competitive games in the regular season. They're probably the best chance out of the WCC to be a 2-bid league most seasons, especially over the last 5 to 6 seasons. That being said, BYU joined in what year?
2011.
2011. Never won a conference title in Vegas. Made the tournament a couple of times. That's the other way to look at it is, yes, they made us competitive and they beat us a couple of times, but in the grand scheme of things, our non-conference is what's powered us to the tournament every year anyways, and is what's kept us the most competitive every year anyways. I think those are the two sides of the coin. I land probably somewhere in the middle in that it hurts a lot to lose BYU, but I don't think the WCC is totally broken without BYU.
I think people don't actually know the deal with with the WCC. Last year, according to KenPom, the WCC was the 8th best conference in the nation, right? Out of 32 conferences? Yeah. Out of 32 conferences, the WCC was the 8th best. So beyond doing something crazy and scheduling or moving to a conference where we would have to travel over 1,500 miles for every away game, I don't really know if there's a better option right now. And I think that Mid-Major Madness posted an article with a few different options for us. I think that the best thing for us to do would be to schedule 2 games a year with Memphis, or a team like Memphis that is really good, that is also kind of being screwed over by this realignment. And that would be a way for us to show that we can hang with the big dogs, get 2 quad 1 games back on our schedule. And yeah, while they wouldn't be in our conference, they would provide 2 really good games for us to play. And hopefully we'd be able to schedule them in the middle of conference play. So I think as long as we stay in the WCC, there will always be the people who say that our conference isn't tough enough, that we don't deserve to be in the tournament. But at the end of the day, it's really the only option for us right now, unless the Pac-12 takes us. And the Pac-12 is, not great either. They never really perform in the tournament, other than a few years ago when Oregon made the Final Four. So that's all I have to say about it.
And last year.
Correct. And last year. But I mean, come on. No one predicted that UCLA as an 11 seed was going to go down.
No, but I mean, in terms of total teams making the tournament, they looked pretty decent last year, and I think probably outperformed a lot of the other power conferences in terms of moving on past the first round. That being said, I think you're right. I think it's probably not the move for us to move to the Pac-12. The only other scenario I think that has been thrown out there, and many varieties of this scenario, but is basically creating what you would call the power conference of the West Coast that doesn't include Pac-12 teams. We've seen plenty of names thrown out there, from SDSU to Boise State to Utah State to Gonzaga, and basically throwing them in a 10 to 12 league. Everybody leaves the current Mountain West, Big Sky, AAC, WAC, basically all of those conferences, and creates a 10 to 12 team league of basically the best of the West that isn't Pac-12. Do I see that happening anytime soon? Before BYU leaves? No. Maybe that materializes in the future as we start to see this conference realignment. Maybe it's going to kick off a chain reaction where everybody's going to start moving. And if that happens, sure, I would love to see basically bringing together a bunch of the mid-majors from the West Coast, but it's not an immediate solution to this problem if we deem it one.
So I have a couple counterpoints to both of your guys' original thoughts. And I'm not saying I think that they need to be doing something immediately right now. But I do think the clock's ticking a little bit. One, it's fucking hilarious that BYU has not won a single championship in basketball. And they probably have been, it's hard because St. Mary's has made the tournament the exact same amount of times as BYU has in that 10-year span. They've both made it 4 times. They've actually both, I think, made the championship game in the WCC tournament the same amount of times. St. Mary's has won 2 of those. But I think the whole idea that the WCC slander that gets thrown around, that's always going to be there no matter who's in our league, as long as we have the really bad teams or even the unknown teams in there. I think the issue is when it comes to the tournament and resume is if you take out BYU a few of the last years when we've been in contention for a number 1 seed, except for maybe this last year since we were undefeated, and I don't think it would have mattered regardless. But I don't know if we get a number 1 seed without BYU getting to play them twice in conference and 3 times if we see them in the tournament. And where that becomes an issue is the way we're headed in scheduling and with the power conferences getting bigger and having these alliances. We've seen it with what was supposed to be the Pac-12, Big Ten, and one of the other ones, and them expanding to 20-plus game conference schedules, is it's going to get harder and harder for the non-conference schools to get game, or for the mid-majors to get games against these power conference teams. Luckily, Gonzaga is like the one school that they want to schedule. But if the conferences make it so that it's really hard to do that because they're already playing a 20-game slate plus 2 crossover games with different conferences, and then you throw in all this other stuff and the conferences are getting bigger, that's where it worries me about the future of Gonzaga basketball. And the conference has grown with us in a way, not at the same rate, obviously, but the WCC has been getting better and better every year. And the addition of BYU was huge in that. And we talk about Ken Palm conference ratings. We would very easily, without BYU, be the worst of the higher mid-major teams. Mountain West was bad this last year. They were 11th, but it's normally the American, West Coast Conference, Atlantic 10, and Mountain West. And I think we would be pretty consistently at the bottom of that without BYU helping bring that up. And we'd be losing 2 to 3 Q1 games every year. I don't think it affects our quality. I think we're still going to do what we're going to do, but it might put us in a worse situation than if they're not there. And then when the scheduling really does change, especially when you start looking at 2025 with all these new contracts and TV contracts, that's where it worries me a little bit, where I think it might be broken. And we talk about adding Grand Canyon or one of these other schools. I think Grand Canyon is they have a really big fan base. They have a huge following. They got a lot of money going in it. They got Jerry Colangelo, whatever, backing it. The school is a little iffy, but they're also they made the tournament this last year, but they wouldn't be a contender in the WCC for at least a handful of years. So I don't know if Gonzaga can afford in the long term to wait for something like that to maybe play out and hope that St. Mary's gets back to being a little more consistent. So I know there's been some rumors that we would consider looking or are looking at the Big East. Who knows? I mean, there's a lot to think about there with our other sports and other teams, and if the WCC would even let the rest of our teams stay in the conference if basketball wasn't there making them money. But
yeah,
I don't know. It's going to be really interesting to see how it all plays out, and if we do finally decide to make a leap, or if the WCC just tries to cater to get Gonzaga to stay, cater to Gonzaga again, to do whatever they can to get us to stay.
At that point, that's the power dynamic, which is good for us. I think what's hard is that the problem isn't big enough to warrant one of the possible solutions happening. And what I mean by that is like something huge would have to happen in order for any of the big time scenarios. I'm not talking about like adding Grand Canyon, right? I'm talking about bringing over Colorado State, Boise State, San Diego State, and someone like the Mountain West would probably have to be a football only conference. The WCC would have to expand, incredibly, and we would still probably have to drop the lowest tier teams, like, maybe Portland, and so that's not a great solution. There really isn't another viable option on the West Coast for us that fits, at least without doing something drastic like that. So I don't know if the question is the WCC broken? It's, would one of the possible solutions be worth the trouble? Like, is the problem big enough to warrant one of those big solutions? I don't think the answer is yes at this point.
Yeah. And I mean, as a basketball fan, like just looking at men's basketball, the Big East is like a dream. It fits the school with the Catholic universities, and that's the kind of the roots for the Big East. But yeah, I mean, and the travel, I think after this last year, the travel's less of a big thing. Like, we traveled so much last year for non-conference. But again, it was mainly in the middle part of the country. But who knows? I think we would definitely, if we did join the Big East, they'd need to bring somebody else from over here with them or with us to have as a travel partner. And like you said, Pac-12 pretty much said they're not looking to expand and would never go after a school that didn't have football. So, and public research universities Gonzaga is definitely not a public research university. One thing, though, that I think has been a little bit overlooked is what we considered in 2018 was just straight up joining the Mountain West. That conference is still there. There's questions on if Boise State, San Diego State, some of those schools might get poached by different conferences, maybe the American if they decide to expand west. But 2018, it was a tight conversation. Some people thought we should go. Some people thought we shouldn't. We decided to stay. WCC catered to our wishes. But now without BYU, does that change for any? I think the Mountain West, at least from a basketball standpoint, other than them having an emphasis on football, I think from a competition level, it's probably better more consistently now at the top.
If we're going to leave the WCC for a current conference alignment, right? Like we're going to go to another conference that currently exists with like either by ourselves or with one other team. I think the Mountain West is our best opportunity west of the Mississippi, right? I think that makes the most sense. I think from a travel perspective, it makes the most sense. From a competitive standpoint, yeah, it would probably your average team in the Mountain West is better than your average team in the WCC. Removing BYU now, I think that's pretty apparent in the success that SDSU has had recently, and I think the middle of their conference is probably better than the middle of our conference.
Outside of last year, probably.
Outside of last year, yeah. Taking maybe the last 5 to 6 years into context, I think I'd probably rather play in the Mountain West. I think to Brian's point, probably doesn't need to happen right now, but I think Carson's point's also valid that we can't just sit around on forever and say and hope something happens and then all of a sudden everybody realigns before us and then we're left as the odd man out, right? And stuck in the WCC and teams non-conference is eaten away by, these partnerships between different conferences to have teams go do series at different schools and other conferences and kind of have that be a set thing every year. Gonzaga is going to have trouble scheduling in the future if that's the case.
Which, again, I love the idea of scheduling Memphis and some of these other teams who are getting screwed over now, but that to me is not a sustainable thing because eventually Memphis is going to find another conference or join somewhere else, or that American Athletic Conference is going to add more teams, and that's not going to be an option for them. But it's a hell of a first year of the job for the new AD, that's for sure.
I was just going to say Mike Roth is either celebrating his ass off that he doesn't have to deal with this or slightly kicking himself that he's leaving all this to Standiford, because it's a tough conversation. He's got to be sweating a little bit knowing that something's got to come in the next couple of years, whether it be us to a new conference, new teams here, or a new conference in general.
I just want to make one quick point on the Mountain West, like moving to the Mountain West. If you look at Ken Pom from last year, and I would want to probably look at more of a 10-year, like a decade-long outlook or look back on this, but I just think the conferences are very different in terms of the distribution of quality of teams. So at the very top, the Mountain West, the number one team in the Mountain West in Ken Pom was San Diego State at 30, Utah State 46, Boise State 61, Colorado State 76, like all bunched up right towards the top. Nevada at 91, right? As you get to the bottom of the conference, it gets really, really bad. And in this last year, there were 3 teams that were almost as bad as Portland. New Mexico was 294, Air Force 332, San Jose State 333. Right. So, 332 and 333 are worse than Portland. Portland was 321. The next worst team in the WCC was San Diego at 195. And both conferences have the same number of teams in the top 100 in Ken Pom. Each conference has 5 teams in the top 100. The big difference is that the WCC teams that are in the top 100 just happen to be milling around in the 75 to 90 range, with USF, LMU, and Pepperdine all in the 90s, right? So it would be a trade-off. We would trade like more consistent, better competition for a few really bad games in exchange for more Q1 games. So it's tough. So anyway, that was my final note on that. I think, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but it, it just had to be said. It's not the easiest decision. There's trade-offs there.
Definitely. Well, I think it's going to be something that's going to be fun to follow, because I'm sure it's, and not even just this year, but as more and more info comes out about it, it's going to be a shit show for the good and the bad. Hopefully the good for us, but we'll see where it goes. But we'll move on to our last kind of segment of today, which is going to be multi-part over the next 3 or 4 episodes. We've kind of put together a list of the biggest questions surrounding each player going into this new season that are kind of the big questions for how far this team can go and how far they can go. So I have names of, I think, 11 guys. Maybe there's 10 in a jar here in my hand, and I'm going to pull out 3, and we're going to discuss 3 today, 3 in the next episode, and then 3 or 2 over the last few ones. So I got Rasir Bolton, Julian Strawther, and Nolan Hickman are our 3 for today. So we got some good ones to go here. Let's start with Bolton.
Before we hop into Bolton, I think we need to talk about the fact that these are 3 guys that are basically battling for 2 starter spots. If you throw Hunter Salas in the mix too, but these 3 are got to be at each other's throats at practice, and I think it's a really good thing that we're discussing all 3 at the same time, because we can kind of compare where we think this might go. But let's kick it off with Rasir.
Yeah. So his 3-point percentage and his turnover rate improve with being surrounded by better players and playing more off ball. So we kind of know the deal with him. It's brought up a lot on Twitter and conversations about him and some of the doubts that people have out there, which I think are a little bit unwarranted. The guy's a former all Big 12 player, but his numbers are a little bit low. Hopefully we can give some context to those. His career, for his career, he's 34.2% from 3. He shot 31.4% last season. And he averages 2.8 turnovers per game on his career, 3.2 last season, with an assist to turnover ratio below 1 for his career, and 18.8% turnover rate last year. So not great. I think some of the context that needs to be there is, one, he played on a god-awful team last year, where he was the primary ball handler. And when you don't have good players around you and you're a primary ball handler, I think you're probably going to be trying to force more stuff. You're going to be, put in situations where you might be passing it to somebody who's not great with the ball or isn't ready, and there might be some chemistry issues there with a team that's losing as much as they are. And then just from the shooting perspective, being off ball with the guys like Andrew Nembhard and Drew Timme, where that's going to take the attention away. I mean, he's going from the number 1 option, number 1 or number 2, to the 4th, 5th, maybe on the court. So he's shot the ball great from the free throw line in his career. He seems to have a good stroke. And I think as long as he gets comfortable with the rhythm of shooting off ball rather than off the dribble, I think the 3-point percentage is going to be fine. For the turnovers, who knows? Some guys are turnover prone, but I think having the ball in his hands less is probably going to lead to lower turnovers. I don't know what his usage rate was, or if there's a stat for how often he had the ball in his hands, but it's probably not as bad as it looks when you take that into consideration. But so my answer for this is, I think both will improve. I personally think he's going to be the day 1 starter at one of the guard positions, just with the experience and Big 12 experience. And he's a great player who's established. So as long as he's meshing well, I think that's where we'll see him. What about you guys?
Yeah, I think it'll be I think you're right. I think him being off ball will probably help, especially with the turnover percentage or assist to turnover ratio. I also think I would like to see him start, as much as I haven't thrown him out there very much in my like potential starting lineups. I think the more I think about it, the more we've discussed this, the more I've thought about it with this conversation in mind. I think, and I think it's the kind of the second question here, is how will not being the premier scorer impact the way he plays? I think to take that a little bit of a twist on that question is, how will not being a starter impact the way he plays if he weren't to start? And I think that would be a huge detriment to his gameplay if he ends up coming off the bench. Now, would he be best suited for that? Potentially. You bring him off the bench. He's an interjection of energy. He's a really good player to bring off as your sixth man. That being said, I can't imagine to be great for the mentality of a player who goes from being the guy to coming off the bench for a team. Granted, it's Gonzaga, so I'd love to see him in the starting lineup, and I do think that the turnover ratio especially will improve as he moves to off-ball.
Yeah, I remember seeing a stat from the folks over at Shot Quality. Great follow on Twitter, by the way. Lots of great stats. And, you know, who knows how accurate their metrics are, but I think is in terms of like general, you know, like general rules of thumb for games and for players, they do a really good job. Rasir Bolton, in terms of efficiency quality of shot, when he was creating a shot for himself, he was in the 99th percentile for the nation. So that's what he did at Iowa State. He had the ball in his hands a lot, right? As we've talked about. When it came to others on his team creating for him, he was in the bottom 1 percentile. So I think that tells you everything that you need to know. I mean, the quality of shots that he was getting because his teammates were not able to draw defenders in for kickouts and things like that. I mean, like all the negative impacts of going through that on your 3-point percentage, on your ability to get off a shot in rhythm, like all that stuff is impacted. So I would imagine that he is able to really get in the flow. And based on some of the videos that he's posted, just of his training and some interviews and things like that, it seems like, you know, he's really bought into, you know, his new role, which is pretty cool. So yeah, I think he's going to do just fine.
The mental aspect of going from, you know, the guy to maybe even a bench guy. And we heard that when we talked to Gino and how that's kind of a tough transition. But I almost think with his shot making, to Brian's point, like his shot creation, if he is coming off the bench, I think that's huge for us to have, as long as he's confident with it. We saw it with Aaron Cook come in last year and give us a spark a few times, but obviously there was some discomfort with, like, you know, you go from being the guy to not being the guy, you might kind of cage in and not want to shoot as much. As long as his confidence is there, I think he's going to be huge, whether he's in the starting lineup or needing to give us some play creation off the bench.
Let's talk about another new guy to the Zag roster this year, who's also potentially being a competition for a starting spot, Nolan Hickman. And the question being, are his shooting and shot creating abilities strong enough to contend for a starting spot during this season? Brian, what do you think?
No. I mean, look, yes, I think he's an amazing player. I think maybe any other year he would be in the starting lineup. Like he's an incredible player, right? In terms of his shot making ability, I don't know. He's a point guard. He's a true point guard, right? And I think, unfortunately, this year for him, it kind of puts him, you know, as the heir apparent to Andrew Nembhard. So I think whether or not he plays, I think isn't going to be dictated by
his own ability,
by his ability to like make shots. I think he's going to be just the true backup to Andrew Nembhard. So that's my personal opinion. It's nothing against him as a player. I think that he's an amazing player. He's definitely going to be a really, really just I think one of the best Zags of all time, really, as we see him progress through his career. But I just don't think his role is going to be playing off the ball. That's kind of just my 2 cents.
See, I think the more I've thought about it and heard stuff coming out of the program and just seeing the way he's been playing in some of these pieces that have been done on him, I think at some point in the season, I think Rasir Bolton is going to start the year. And maybe he plays well enough to where he keeps that and they don't want to mess with it. But if I was making a bet that maybe isn't super popular that I could win some money on, I think Nolan Hickman takes over the second starting spot at some point in the season. Might be conference, might be because of an injury. And I think once he gets it, he doesn't give it up. I think it could be similar to a Nemhard situation last year. But similar to Bolton in that he has a play creating and a shot creating ability that not a lot of guys have, that, you know, you can develop it, but certain people have it. And he kind of has that knack. And just seeing some of these, there's been a few Twitter threads about him over the last few weeks. And I mean, besides just being, I think, a guy who the team is really going to mesh well with, he sounds like he's a great kid. I think it's something that is really rare. And if Andrew Nemhard isn't the shot creator for his own shot on the perimeter that we think he is going to be, that could be a huge thing. Not that he's taking Nemhard's spot, but I think he can be paired with anybody on the court. He can spot up if you need to. I don't think he's going to be the best shooter on the team. I think that's probably Chet, but I think he's going to be top 3. He has a stroke. He's always been consistent from 3. And he can do it off the dribble too. So I think he's going to be in the starting lineup eventually. If not, I think he's going to be playing significant minutes off the bench. And he might be better off the bench than Bolton this year. So I guess we'll see. All right, last one. Competing for a little bit of a different spot than I think the last two. Those two are kind of more for the second guard, whereas Strawther is kind of competing for the third guard or more of the small forward. His question that we have is he ready to make the jump to be a starter and reliable scorer on the number 1 team in the country? Who wants to take this one?
I'll start. I have a little bit of it. Reliable scorer is an interesting part of that question. Is he ready to make the jump to be a starter? Yes, I think so. I think he showed last season a little bit of defensive chops. I think he showed his ability to play offense. I think he has shown that he is an athletic player. I loved what I saw him at the end of last season. That being said, reliable scorer is a tough part of that. I don't know that he's ready to be a reliable scorer, but I don't know that he needs to be a reliable scorer on the number 1 team in the country because of the fact that we have the number 1 player in the country, Drew Timme. We've got the number 1 incoming freshman / also potential national player of the year, Chet Holmgren. We've got a returning starting guard of Nemhard. We talked about 2 really solid guys that are scorers. I think Hickman or Bolton or Salas, whoever you plug in at that other guard position, is going to be more of a scorer than Strawther will be. And I think Strawther has a better chance of making the lineup than any of those guys in terms of like overall percentage of like this guy's going to be a starter. I think he's a lengthy guy who's going to be good on the wing. I would love to see him start. I think he will be a really good presence for the Zags. I also think, having another, at this point, veteran presence kind of means sophomores at times, but I think he'll be a good returning presence and would like to see him in the starting lineup rather than 2 freshmen.
Yeah, I agree with you on that last one. I definitely think he's going to be not definitely. I think he will be the starter at the beginning of the year at that kind of third guard, small forward spot. He fits the mold of it the best, and because I don't really think Anton works there with the other guys on the court. But from a scoring perspective, like, let's not forget who this guy was in high school and on the junior national team for wherever he plays. Is it Puerto Rico, I think? He dropped 60-some points in a game, and his team was terrible, but he was playing against the same competition that Ayayi and some of those other guys who are from international guys Alan Gonzaga were playing against. Like, the dude can score. And the thing that worries me a little bit sometimes when you look at a roster that has a lot of new guys that need to step up is, Drew Timmy's going to get his points. He might have a couple off nights that he had this last year. Nemhard is probably not going to be a 16, 17 point a game guy. I hope we can get 15 out of him. And then Chet, and we have questions for him later that will kind of play into this, but like, who knows how quickly, we know his defense is going to be there, but how quickly is that offense go there where it's consistent? And so then you look at that and you're like, all right, we got 40-ish points between 3 or 4 guys if you throw in another guy. But like, when the going gets tough and you're playing against a tough team that's really good on the defensive end, who's there to step up and score? And we've seen that pretty much every other year. Last year we were so deep that we had 4 guys we could rely on to score. But like, if Aaron Cook isn't scoring, if Anton's not scoring, if, going down the bench and you weren't getting stuff from Julian or Dom at that point because they weren't really playing, but some of these other guys, when you need them to step up, when your off guys or when your main guys are getting shut down or just getting a lot of attention, like, you have to have somebody who's there to put in 10 to 15 consistently. And if they're being ignored, like, they can go off and have that game. And I don't know who that 4th person is on this team this year. Last year it was Joel, because if you shut down Jalen and Corey and Drew, Joel's going to give you 20 in a Final Four game. I don't know where that's coming from this year, and that's going to be really interesting. And I think he probably is the most polished besides Bolton, maybe, who's ready and has the length and size to step up and do that. But doing it consistently is a whole other thing.
I honestly think that Julian Strawther, or the role that he is going to play, is kind of going to be the X factor for the team. And by X factor, I want to be clear. I don't mean he's going to be the best player. That's definitely not going to be the case. I don't mean that he's going to have to score a whole bunch of points in order for us to be successful. What I mean is, he is likely going to face the worst defender on the floor, just because you need a solid defender on. You're going to need a solid defender on Andrew Nemhard, and then Chet Holmgren and Drew Timme are going to draw a ton of attention. And teams are going to have to I think teams are going to have to try and just figure out the best way to defend Chet. And there are going to be trade-offs. So I think there are going to be times where Chet maybe faces a smaller defender and Julian Strawther ends up having like a bigger guy on him potentially, who maybe can't move his feet as well. In those situations, Julian's going to need to be able to get to the basket. I think in other situations, he's going to have smaller guards that are on him and he'll be able to post up. And so I think that he'll bring that, mismatch ability, if you will, to the team that I don't know if the smaller guards are going to be able to provide. So that's kind of my thought on him. I think he'll be the X factor because he's maybe the guy that people aren't really thinking about or considering. And he's definitely not going to be the focus of a lot of game planning. So
yeah, that's a great point. I think outside of a few teams in the country, if he's in the starting lineup with those guys we just talked about, like, yeah, he's almost always going to have a mismatch because not a lot of teams have a 6'8" or 6'7", however tall he is, guy on the wing who's also athletic and can get to the hoop and can post you up if you need to. Like, that's what Anton can't do or couldn't do last season. He couldn't do that on the perimeter. He could back you down, but yeah, Strawther is going to be a problem for a lot of teams. And that's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up with the mismatches.
I think the 3 guys we just talked about all fall in that category, that outline that you just said, B. Mary, of like the X factor. Like, the X factor isn't, to a degree, yeah, sure, is Chet going to have a National Player of the Year season? Absolutely, that's an X factor. But I think, like, how do these 5 through, because I think Anton's kind of 4, even though we know he's not going to probably start, but like, how does this like 5 through 7 spot, how do those players affect this year's team? And what does that look like, I think is going to be the biggest question.
Definitely. All right. Well, we'll save the others for the next few. I think that was fun, and I'm looking forward to do another 3 with our next episode. So we'll try to get through 3 every week and have some big ones coming up. We still haven't touched on the 3 probably biggest players on the team this year, and then also Brian's favorite. So
My personal favorite.
We'll make sure to tweet at his mom when we do that one.
I think the only other thing we want to mention before we wrap up the episode is our good friend Josh over at Zagaholic has launched a website that's a conglomeration of a bunch of different folks from Zag Twitter and a bunch of different people that put out Zag content. So go check that out at zagaholic.net. We're going to be working with them from a podcast perspective. I think myself, Carson, and Brian are all going to be writing articles on that website. Josh's first article is up as we speak. The website just launched. There will be some in-depth statistical stuff that'll go on there as well, or I should say large swaths of statistical information that I know this podcast at the very least will pull from to do some in-depth statistical analysis, as that's something that we like to dive into. So go check that out at zagaholic.net. Follow us and the rest of the folks that are contributors listed on that website on Twitter as well for more Zag content.
All right. Go Zags.
Go Zags.
Go Zags.